Emily was only 10 when her father, Mark, drove her deep into the woods, left her standing alone in the cold, and disappeared into the night, an act that would uncover secrets darker than anyone in their town could have imagined. The small town was already quiet when the dark blue sedan rolled slowly out of the neighborhood and onto the open highway. It was late enough that most families were indoors, lights glowing faintly through windows, the streets nearly empty except for the occasional passing car. Mark sat rigid in the driver's seat, his face lit only by the faint dashboard glow. His 10-year-old daughter, Emily, sat in the back, strapped into her seatbelt, clutching a small backpack against her chest. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't try to make conversation. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the night outside. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the yellow lines blurring under the beams of the headlights. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, jaw locked. He drove past familiar landmarks, the diner where he used to take Emily for pancakes on weekends, the small gas station where she would beg for candy, the park with the swings she had outgrown. Each familiar sight slipped by like pieces of a life he was leaving behind. Emily shifted slightly in her seat but didn't speak. She could sense something was wrong. The rhythm of this drive felt different. They left the paved road after nearly an hour, turning onto a narrow dirt path that cut through thick woods. The crunch of gravel beneath the tires was the only sound besides the hum of the engine. The deeper they went, the darker it became, branches arching overhead, blocking out even the faint light of the stars. Emily hugged her backpack tighter, her small fingers gripping the straps as though it was the only thing tethering her to safety. The air inside the car seemed colder here, as if the forest itself had seeped into the vehicle. Mark slowed the car and finally stopped in a clearing where the dirt road thinned into nothing. The engine idled for a moment before he turned the key, and silence swallowed everything. He got out of the car without looking back. His movements were deliberate, mechanical. He walked around to the back door, opened it, and looked down at his daughter. Emily hesitated but unbuckled her seatbelt and slid out, standing beside the car in the damp earth. Her sneakers sank slightly into the mud. She glanced up at her father, but he didn't meet her eyes. Mark stepped back into the driver's seat, shutting the door firmly. The ignition roared, headlights slicing through the blackness of the trees. Emily stood frozen, her backpack dangling from one shoulder, her breath visible in the cool night air. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply stared at the car as it lurched forward, gravel scattering under the tires. The red glow of taillights burned against the trees for a fleeting moment before shrinking to pinpoints and disappearing altogether. The woods closed in around her, silent and suffocating. Emily remained perfectly still, her small frame dwarfed by the vast emptiness of the clearing. A single owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and the wind whispered through the branches. She shifted her weight, clutching the backpack again, and took one unsteady breath. Her father was gone. The first rays of sunlight crept over the treetops, cutting through the mist that clung to the forest floor. The dirt road where Emily had been left was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every snapping twig sound louder than it should. She had not moved much through the night. Instead, she had curled herself against the trunk of a tree, clutching her backpack like a shield, drifting in and out of shallow sleep whenever exhaustion overpowered her fear. By morning, her clothes were smeared with dirt, her hair tangled into knots, and her eyes distant, as though she had been staring at something no one else could see. Not far from the clearing, two hikers were making their way along a trail. They had set out early, carrying thermoses of coffee and the light chatter of weekend adventurers. The woods were familiar to them, a place where they had spent countless mornings walking side by side. But as they reached a bend in the path, one of them noticed a small figure in the distance. At first, they thought it was a lost doll or discarded bag. Only when they drew closer did they realize it was a child. Emily was sitting at the base of a tree, knees pulled up to her chest. She didn't flinch when the hikers approached. She didn't look at them directly. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the ground, her arms wrapped tightly around her backpack. The hikers exchanged quick glances, the weight of the situation sinking in instantly. Something was wrong. Children did not simply appear alone in the woods with no parent in sight. They tried speaking to her gently, but she offered no response. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her breathing was shallow, almost mechanical, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. They called the authorities immediately, their voices urgent as they relayed the details. Within the hour, the quiet forest was no longer quiet. Police vehicles lined the road, radios crackled with clipped instructions, and uniformed officers carefully combed the area. One officer crouched near Emily, speaking softly as he offered her a blanket. She accepted it without a word, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders. Her small face was pale, her eyes hollow, and yet there was a strange composure about her, as though she had already endured more than most adults could bear. When detectives examined the backpack, she clutched so fiercely they found only 3 items: a half-empty water bottle, a notebook with childlike drawings scattered across the pages, and a faded photograph of her father holding her as a baby. Nothing else. No food, no extra clothes, not even a flashlight. It was not the sort of bag packed for a camping trip or an accidental misplacement. It looked deliberate, as if someone had carefully chosen what she would carry. News of the discovery spread quickly through town. People whispered in grocery stores and on sidewalks, their voices hushed but heavy with judgment. Why would a father leave his daughter alone in the woods? Some said maybe he panicked, others that he had planned it. But one question hung heavier than all the rest. Where was Mark now? The investigation into Mark's disappearance began the same day Emily was found. Detectives returned her to safety and shifted their focus to the man who had driven her into the woods and vanished without explanation. On paper, Mark appeared to be an average single father, working odd jobs while trying to raise his daughter after the supposed death of his wife years earlier. At first glance, it was easy to believe he had simply broken under the pressures of life. But as investigators peeled back the layers of his past, the picture grew far darker. The first sign that something was wrong came from financial records. Mark's accounts were nearly empty. He had accumulated staggering debts that reached into the tens of thousands, most of it owed to private lenders rather than banks. Receipts from casinos showed frequent late-night visits, and phone records revealed a trail of calls to people known for their involvement in illegal gambling. Mark had been drowning in problems, and every stone overturned uncovered another weight dragging him further under. When police entered his small home, the unease deepened. The kitchen counters were littered with unpaid bills, all marked with red notices demanding immediate payment. In the corner sat an old coffee table covered with scraps of paper filled with numbers, strange markings, and lists that looked like some kind of code. The handwriting matched the drawings in Emily's notebook. It was as if the same compulsive pattern-making had spread from father to daughter, only hers appeared as pictures and his as cryptic notes. Neighbors painted a mixed portrait of him. Some described him as quiet but devoted, a father who always walked Emily to school. Others recalled odd behavior, such as disappearing for nights at a time or pacing his porch long after midnight, chain-smoking and muttering under his breath. One neighbor mentioned a disturbing argument she overheard between Mark and an unknown visitor only a week before Emily was left in the woods. She couldn't hear the details, but she remembered the desperation in his voice, rising and cracking like a man cornered. The most chilling discovery came when investigators pulled up records connected to Emily's mother. 5 years earlier, it had been widely accepted that she died in a car accident on a stormy night, leaving Mark to raise their daughter alone. But the deeper police dug, the less sense the story made. No official death certificate had ever been filed. There were vague reports of a wrecked vehicle, but no body had been recovered, and no clear paperwork existed to confirm the tragedy. It was as though she had been erased with nothing more than a rumor. Detectives began to suspect that Emily's abandonment was not an isolated act of cruelty, but part of a larger plan. Perhaps Mark feared exposure. Perhaps the burden of his secrets had grown unbearable. The missing pieces surrounding his wife's fate hung over the case like a storm cloud. Was she truly gone, or had Mark hidden something far more sinister than anyone imagined? The search for Mark intensified after his sedan was pulled from the shallow river. Detectives stood on the muddy bank, staring at the vehicle, baffled by what they saw inside. His wallet sat neatly on the console, his identification tucked where anyone could find it, and his keys still in the ignition. The driver's seat was empty, the seatbelt dangling loose, swaying slightly with the movement of the water. It looked staged, almost theatrical, as though someone had carefully arranged the scene for discovery. Divers combed the river for hours, their lights cutting through the murky depths, but no trace of a body was ever recovered. The current wasn't strong enough to carry someone far, and yet Mark was nowhere to be found. Theories quickly divided the investigation. Some officers believed Mark had ended his life, overwhelmed by debt and guilt. Others were convinced he had orchestrated his own disappearance, using the river as a prop in a larger escape plan. What unsettled everyone was the precision of it all. Abandoning his daughter in the woods could be seen as panic, but the car in the river told a different story. That felt calculated, deliberate, like the final move in a game he had been playing for years. Reporters swarmed the town, their headlines filled with speculation. Neighbors whispered in grocery store aisles, wondering if they had missed signs of what Mark was capable of. In the middle of it all was Emily, the quiet center of a storm she couldn't fully understand. Under the care of investigators, she rarely spoke, but she began to communicate in another way, through the drawings that filled the pages of her notebook. At first, the sketches seemed harmless: a tree with spreading branches, a crooked road leading to nowhere, a car sitting under the sun. But then the pictures grew darker, more specific. She drew a house again and again, each version nearly identical. Its windows were boarded shut, the roof sloped, and a single figure appeared in the upper window. Always a woman, always watching from behind the glass. Alongside the house was a car, parked in the driveway, its outline carefully traced each time. Detectives stared at the drawings, unsettled by the detail. These weren't the fleeting imaginations of a child. They looked like memories captured on paper, fragments of something Emily had once seen. When asked gently about them, she refused to explain. Instead, she turned the page and drew the same image once more, her pencil pressing harder as though she needed the message to be understood. The drawings shifted the investigation again. If Emily's pictures held truth, they suggested her life had intersected with places and events never uncovered during the first searches. The abandoned farmhouse she drew might be real, and the figure in the window raised terrifying questions. Could her mother, believed dead for years, still be alive? Or were these sketches only the echoes of a child trying to make sense of trauma? Detectives knew one thing for certain: the answers would not be found in the river. They would be hidden somewhere in the shadows Mark had left behind. The farmhouse stood on the edge of a forgotten road, its frame sagging with age, its windows sealed with boards that groaned in the wind. Investigators arrived in the early hours of morning, their flashlights cutting across the overgrown yard. For weeks they had followed faint leads, guided more by Emily's repeated sketches than by traditional evidence. Each drawing had pointed to this same place: a lonely house with a car in the driveway and a shadowed figure behind the glass. Now they were finally here, staring at the real structure that matched her haunting images. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and rot. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and wallpaper peeled in long strips from the damp walls. For a while, it seemed like just another abandoned property, another fruitless search. Then one detective noticed the door to the basement. Unlike the rest of the house, the wood was new, reinforced with a thick chain and padlock. The discovery sent a chill through the team. They broke it open, the clatter of metal echoing through the hollow space. The basement was dark and suffocating, the smell stale and metallic. When the beams of their flashlights swept across the room, they froze on a figure sitting against the wall. A woman, frail and pale, with tangled hair and skin ghostly from years without sunlight. Her eyes squinted against the sudden light. But she was alive. She whispered incoherently, her voice hoarse from disuse. The detectives rushed to her side, helping her up the stairs and into the open air she had not felt in years. The woman was Emily's mother. The truth unraveled in pieces as she regained strength. She had never died in a car accident, as Mark had told everyone. He had staged her disappearance, locking her in this hidden room while raising their daughter alone. His motives were tangled in paranoia, debt, and a desperate need to control. He had crafted a false story for the world, one that allowed him to play the role of grieving widower while concealing the terrible reality inside the farmhouse. Emily's abandonment now carried a chilling new weight. Leaving her in the woods had not been an impulsive act. It was part of Mark's collapsing plan. Perhaps he feared the authorities were closing in. Perhaps he knew Emily's memories of the farmhouse were returning, and that her silence would not last forever. By leaving her behind, he may have been trying to sever the last link to the secret he had guarded for so long. Despite the discovery of the mother, Mark himself was never found. The river yielded no body, and no credible sightings ever surfaced. Some believed he had drowned after leaving his car behind. Others were convinced he had staged everything, using his criminal connections to disappear into another life under another name. His absence only deepened the mystery, leaving unanswered questions about what else he had hidden and why he had chosen such a twisted path. For Emily, the drawings had spoken the words she could not. They led investigators to the truth, rescuing the mother she had once thought lost forever. Yet the shadow of her father's betrayal lingered, a reminder that some mysteries never close completely. The case remained both a rescue and a haunting, a story of survival carved from secrets and silence.